Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that Bay Area Radical Women are on the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone, who are the original inhabitants of the San Francisco Peninsula. I also want to acknowledge that all of us tuning in from the Americas and Australia are also on stolen Indigenous land. As guests, we recognize that we benefit from living and working on traditional homelands and are committed to fight for Indigenous rights throughout the world. So everybody, again, happy International Women's Day. My name is Nancy Reiko Kato, and I'm happy to be your moderator today. I'm a Radical One member in the San Francisco Bay Area, a recently retired ASME 3299 union member, and a leader in SLASH, a coalition combating police brutality and the unemployment crisis. My pronouns are she, her. Today's event, Women Rise Up Globally Against Femicide, is sponsored by Radical Women in Australia and the US. We've been organizing, fighting, winning, taking on the bosses, the bigots, and bureaucrats since 1967. We're a multiracial, revolutionary feminist, grassroots activist organization that provides a radical voice within the feminist movement and a feminist voice within the left. Events like today's are just one of the many things we do, and I hope you'll check us out and join Radical Women. I love the history of International Working Women's Day. It stems back to 1908 when 15,000 women garment workers went on strike for higher wages and the right to vote in New York City. A year later, Clara Zetkin, a leader in the German Socialist Party, proposed to the Second International Conference of Socialist Women that March 8th be celebrated as International Women's Day. In 1917, Russian women textile workers took to the street on March 8th to strike for bread and peace. They called on all workers to join them, which they did, and 4 days later, the Tsarist autocracy was defeated. You can read more about the radical roots of International Working Women's Day in the Freedom Socialist newspaper. Check out the link in the chat to get a subscription. So even though the day has been celebrated around over the years for over a century, it's barely recognized in the US until recently. This year, women marched from Kosovo, Turkey, Myanmar, Japan, Mexico, Australia, Argentina, and all points in between. They protested the ongoing violence against women, the unjust farming laws in India, and for the right to abortion and equal rights. The issues may have varied, but the message was the same. Women are fed up and we are fighting back. I also wanted to share some greetings from our Argentinian sisters from Mujeres por la Libertad. They say, from Argentina, we salute you. This March 8th, women made the earth tremble once more. We raised our voices demanding equality and freedom and shouting loudly that we want them to stop killing us. In Argentina, as in other parts of the world, we mobilized the parks and the squares. We denounced the state that is complicit in a woman becoming a victim of femicide every 24 hours. We want everything to burn, and we are ready to face the attacks of patriarchy. We understand that the only way out for women and the working class is to end once and for all the rule of capitalism and patriarchy, and to build a society free of oppression and exploitation, a socialist world. They are not going to stop us. Together, organized and in the streets, we honor the struggles of all our sisters. Hugs and greetings to our revolutionary sisters from US, Australia, and Mexico. So thank you, Mujeres por la Libertad. Our program today begins with 4 featured panelists from different nations and regions who will be discussing the massive cross-border upsurge in defense of women's lives. This will be followed by a half-hour discussion. Afterwards, you're all invited for a more informal discussion, which will include a Spanish-speaking Zoom room for those who would like to take part. So our first speaker today is Charlotte STRAUSS SWANSON. She's a doctoral student at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, where she is researching psychology, gender, and social justice. She has written radical woman statements on violence against immigrant women, the condemnation of sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein, and police violence against women of color. Originally from Brooklyn, New York, she comes from a family of socialist feminists. So welcome, Charlotte.
Hello, everyone. Good evening, afternoon, morning, depending on where everyone is situated in the world. I'm very excited and honored to be here with everyone today and to be celebrating International Women's Day. I want to first acknowledge before I begin that I am speaking from Eastern Tennessee on the land of the Yuchi, Creek, and Cherokee people, and would like to pay tribute to these peoples today and in our continued fight for Indigenous rights around the world. Today, I'll begin by first talking about femicide in the United States, and I'll be speaking about violence against cis and trans women in the context of US militarism, police violence, and the COVID-19 pandemic. As I'll highlight, femicide doesn't occur in a vacuum. It occurs in a socio-political context under the brutality of patriarchal capitalism. I'll be speaking to how capitalism not only perpetuates femicide, but rather how capitalism is entirely dependent upon violence and oppression to exist. Finally, I'll talk about the importance of grassroots organizing, global movements of resistance, and the need for and promise of feminist socialist alternatives. Before I begin, I also want to offer a content warning with a note that I'll be talking about sexual violence and will mention some specific instances of femicide that have occurred in the United States. Femicide, or the killing of women and girls, is a global crisis that's long been unnamed and ignored as a crisis in the United States. The reality is that femicide does happen in the US, and not only does it happen, it's also been steadily on the rise. So some statistics, Women Count USA reports that 1,838 women and girls were killed in 2018. Approximately 3 US women are murdered every day by their current or former intimate partners, and 10 million people are impacted by intimate partner violence every year. The most vulnerable to gender-based violence are always the most oppressed. Black and Indigenous women are disproportionately victimized and killed in the US each year. Trans women of color are especially at risk. Last year, Dominique Remy Falls, a Black trans woman, was murdered and later found by a river in Pennsylvania. Nina Pop, a Black trans woman, was stabbed to death in Missouri. And these homicides are among the 44 transgender and non-conforming people killed in 2020 alone, which is the highest annual homicide rate for these groups on record in the US. Given the pervasive underreporting of gender-based violence, we can also assume that actual estimates of these crimes are much higher. And there are numerous reasons for underreporting, especially to law enforcement, one of which is that police violence against women is its own epidemic. Police violence against women comes in the form of sexual harassment, assault, and killings. It also comes in the form of denying victims access to filing reports, victim blaming, re-traumatizing survivors, and shutting down access to the criminal justice system. Police violence isn't committed by a few bad apples. It's systemic and targeted, most often towards women of color and other marginalized groups. Black women are disproportionately victimized, with the Say It Her Name hashtag emerging to highlight the names and stories of Black women who have been killed by the police. Today, the 1-year anniversary of the murder of Breonna Taylor highlights this brutality. Gender-based violence in the military is also rampant, with women being exposed to egregious acts of harassment and assault with little to zero accountability for perpetrators. Some may be familiar with the story of Vanessa Guillen, a Chicana Army specialist who disappeared from Fort Hood, Texas last April. Her body was found 2 months later in June after she had been killed and buried. Before she disappeared, she had shared with her family that she was being sexually harassed and had been planning to file a harassment complaint against another soldier, Aaron Robinson, who's the primary suspect in her case. And her murder has sparked unprecedented dialogue about violence and harassment against women in the military, with many others speaking out to share their stories. Lastly, the COVID pandemic has only continued to expose the epidemic of violence against women. Domestic violence since the spread of COVID has been yet another pandemic within the pandemic. Due to stay-at-home orders, many more victims have been trapped with their abusers with little resource to leave. While the stock market has reached all-time highs, increased unemployment, job loss, and evictions, especially among immigrants, women of color, and poor women, as well as school closings and lack of stable childcare, have resulted in even greater economic instability for the masses. For victims, this has made it even more difficult to escape abusive partners. And while the mega rich continue to reap their profits, essential resources like housing alternatives for working and poor people have either limited capacity or have simply been shut down. As we can see, the problem of femicide is not a problem that stems from individual men committing individual acts of violence, nor is it a single issue. It's a problem that's rooted in the capitalist state, with the complicity of the courts, with the police and the military, with violence at the borders, stolen children, the abuse and exploitation of sex workers, denial of reproductive justice, and more brutal attacks on women and children that may not always be recognized as femicide, but truly are. Gender-based violence is a tool of the oppressor, of the ruling class, who feeds off the division of working people. Capitalism not only fuels violence against women, capitalism needs violence against women, along with other forms of oppression, to survive. And it will take a united effort of the most oppressed people of the working class to defeat it. Women's oppression will never end under our current economic and political system. The only opportunity to end women's oppression is to end capitalism. Feminist socialism offers an alternative where the working class democratically governs and represents the needs of the people, eliminating the wealthy class and the divisions they try to create among us. As part of our struggle for this new system, we need to hold police accountable through mechanisms like elected civilian review boards, as Radical Women members and the Freedom Socialist Party are actively campaigning for in New York City. We need to fight back against the objectification of women in the mainstream media, sexual harassment in the workplace, and attacks on access to abortion. We need feminists on the front lines fighting fascists and the far right who are pushing to roll back all rights for women. People of all genders, people of color, workers, and LGBTQ people are essential to building a movement that can eliminate femicide and violence against women. Women across the world are already leading the fight. I recently spoke with an Iranian woman organizing with a group of feminist socialists to speak out against rape in Iranian universities. And I learned from her that women are sharing their stories in record numbers, organizing by the masses on social media, and collectively demanding change. And these acts of resistance have led to recent arrests of publicly named perpetrators in Iran. In Turkey, mass protests in the streets and organizing to fight femicide on social media have swept the country. In the Philippines, where the president has historically ordered government soldiers to shoot female labor activists in the genitals, women labor leaders and organizers are fighting back. Throughout Europe, women activists are demanding change from judicial systems and law enforcement agencies that handle domestic violence. In Spain, femicide has been reduced by half in the past 15 years, in no small part due to grassroots organizing and demand for increased emergency hotlines, protective orders, and special courts to prosecute domestic violence cases. In response to femicide in Namibia, protesters in the Shut It Down campaign have called for a state of emergency across the nation, deadlines for governmental policy action, and the resignation of numerous politicians. In Nigeria, women and women's groups are leading protests on the front line against police brutality. I'm honored to be able to share more about these movements and to be part of our international event today to continue organizing and fighting for change against violence against women. And I'll end with my excitement to learn more from our other speakers today about the global movements that are happening in Latin America, Australia, and among Indigenous communities to fight back against femicide and end violence against women.
Thank you, Charlotte. Appreciate that. Everybody is invited to join Charlotte and members of Radical Women at the next National Radical Women meeting, which will feature a report on women's leadership in the Myanmar protest, organizing for reproductive justice, and skills training. So that'll take part on Sunday, March 25th at 3 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time, and there will be a link, or there is a link put in the chat. So thank you. Our next speaker is Earth Feather Sovereign, who is enrolled as a member of the Colville Confederated Tribes and is working to help her people heal from the years of genocide, environmental manipulation, and sexual assault. She is the director of Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women Washington, which has brought this tragedy to the front pages and won state measures to track missing Indigenous women. She's the mother of 4 children, including 2 young daughters. Welcome, Earth Feather.
Okay. Why, Haskalau, good evening. And to Isqueeze, my name is Earth Feather Sovereign. I'm a Silks Okanagan from the 12 bands of the Colville Confederated Tribes. My pronouns are she, her. I acknowledge the Medicine Creek Treaty Tribes of the Staches Nation, in which occupied territory I currently reside on, as an adopted daughter. So how should we rise against femicide? To obtain the world we want, there needs to be a paradigm shift. We need to restore balance. We need a balance of matriarchy from the imbalance of patriarchy. Matriarchy is not about taking over or about power and control. Matriarchy is about balance, nurturing and loving, understanding what's the best interest of not just her people, but all people. Women, the feminine energy, the feminine divine is matriarchy. Hope is women, the light, love that's everlasting. As a woman, the sacred feminine, we need to accept our connection with our universe. As Indigenous people, we don't keep track of time as one rotation around the sun. We look at the entirety of the universe. The universe takes 280 days to make one full circle. Do you know how long it takes for us to grow inside our mother's wombs? 280 days. The law of the universe are manifested in our women of all nations. Our women give birth. We have a high tolerance of pain. We have endurance. We live longer. So why would we not follow our women? Natural law is how we as human beings are able to live in harmony with one another. Inherent law is having the right to eat healthy food, drink clean water, and walk throughout our inherent lands, feeling safe and free from harm. Prophets had told us that we need to return to our indigenous way of living and being if we want to save our existence. We are all visitors here on this planet Earth, our Mother Earth. Most indigenous cultures are matriarchal, not just indigenous people of Turtle Island, which is in North America, but everyone has indigenous roots somewhere. We are all primitive at one point. We have all been subjugated and colonized at one point. And reaching back to our indigenous ways, will we be able to reconnect with our Mother Earth. We will be able to heal her. As a sacred feminine, I know there has been an undeclared war against our women, our matriarchs. We have 322,865 women missing in the United States of America. Our Native American indigenous people make up 2% of the population, and we have 5,712 missing American Indian women and girls. Over 4,000 missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in Canada, as well as continued immigration concentration camps in the United States, where thousands of missing women and children have been reported. Our Indigenous women, statistically, we're at the bottom of our nation's totem pole of oppression, suppression, and subjugation. Tribes have the highest number of rape, sex trafficking, domestic violence, and police brutality. How ignorant our government is, because they do not realize women are the field that produces our nation. And if you can't protect our women, you can't protect our nation. Muhammad Ali. They say that every time one Indigenous woman dies, 4 people die with her. My people made a covenant with the Creator to be stewards and caretakers of our Mother Earth. In the United States, it's our treaties that they sign with the tribal leaders that are made to protect us, the supreme law of the land. But today, our government continues to violate these treaties. Over greed, they continue to want to take our land because they want the natural resources, and they destroy anything in their way. They rape our Mother Earth like they rape our women. They call it manifested destiny. We bring it back to Christopher Columbus and Pope Alexander VI's doctrine of discovery. On May 4th, 1493, any lands not inhabited by Christians was available to be discovered, claimed, and exploited by Christian rulers, and declared that the Catholic faith and the Christian religion be exalted and be everywhere increased and spread, that the health of souls be carried for in the barbarous nations be overthrown and brought to the faith itself. It is written by Bartholomew de las Casas, pleading to the King and Queen of Spain upon observing nature and manners of the indigenous people of Guanahani, the island that Columbus first visited. Their manners are decorous and praiseworthy. They are guileless and honest, with no vice among them. They have no thieves or liars among them, and they give freely of all that they have. And when they have no more to give, they cry. They are truly as the children of God, los niños de los indios. During the 1400s, India was called Bharat. They were not called Indians, and there was no India. The indigenous people of America are the Americans, los niños de los indios. Christopher Columbus was the first sex and human trafficker in the Americas. He discovered our beautiful people were worth their weight in gold, selling girls as young as 9 years old. He committed genocide upon the Guanahani Nation. Then other continents with indigenous people followed Columbus's lead, while waving around the doctrine of discovery. To help heal ourselves, our homes, our communities, we must break the chains of toxicity. We must be strong while cutting off the chains of hate, negativity, and evil that was learned behavior by our colonizers and oppressors. Otherwise, we may continue to spiral in a world of destruction for everyone. Hate for hate will only intensify the existence, hate, and evil in our universe. Somewhere, someone must have sense and be strong to break the chain. We must then inject in the universe the strong and powerful sense of love. Hate distorts the personality and character of the hater, also the mental health of the hater. A person that becomes beautiful becomes ugly in the person. Ugly becomes beautiful. Good becomes bad and bad becomes good. True becomes false and false becomes truth. When we love everyone, we discover it in the very root of love. It has redemptive power. Loving our enemy is an opportunity to transform them, to give them an opportunity for a change of heart. We must change our mindset of believing we should have an eye for an eye or hating for a hating. We were taught better by our world prophets and spiritual advisors that doing so is not the way. Our world is in a continuous transition. We have come to the crossroads. How we choose may become a reflection on our nation. Some may call it a radical revolution or even progression. As I see it, it roots from our primitive teachings and carries through our mothers. Our mothers are our connection to the universe, our traditional teachers of unconditional love. We must reach into our intergenerational wisdom of that love carried by our ancestral grandparents, who also carries our love. History, unfortunately, leaves some people oppressed and some people oppressors. There are three ways an oppressed can deal with their oppression. One is they can uprise with physical violence, with corroding hatred. This is not the way, because violence creates more social problems than it solves. When we come to violence, it may not affect us now, but it may follow our children, then onto our children's children, also passing down intergenerational wounds and trauma. Another way is to acquiesce and to give in, to attempt to resign yourself of the oppression. This is not the way, because the non-cooperation of evil is as much of a moral obligation as in cooperation with good. When we remain silent and complicit, we are an accomplice. The third way, that is to organize mass nonviolent resistance based on the principles of love. We must not look away in silence, but we must stand up for the power of love. We must ignite the power of love towards our enemies, our oppressors, our haters. We must tap into redemptive root of love. With this love, we will be able to make men better who hold that patriarchal authority. We must bring to balance our motherly love, and our whole world will change for the better. As caretakers of the power of love, we are able to love our enemies and to bless the people that curse us, to be good to the people who hate us. We are able to pray for those people who have despitefully used us. Love is an eternal reminder to a generation depending on nuclear and atomic energy, a generation depending on fossil fuels, a generation depending on physical violence, that love is the only creative, redemptive, transforming power of the universe. As matriarchs, we must take hold of your homes and children. It's the women who raise our children, nurture our children, especially our boys, so they will grow up to respect and honor women. Also, knowing your history is acknowledging our history, the true history and healing. Intergenerational trauma will begin. We must be willing to have uncomfortable conversations. We must be willing to hold each other accountable and call each other out when we see hate and racism, but in a motherly way. White people and imperialists must change the system that subjugates and marginalizes us, separates us in racial categories. They need to fix it. We must learn to understand the differences between racial equality and racial equity, help uplift Indigenous voices. Men must call out other men and remember how to view our women and children as sacred and to stand up and be protectors. Cheyenne proverb is a nation is not conquered until the hearts of its women are on the ground. Then it's finished, no matter how brave its warriors are how strong its weapons. Together, let's restore the balance and create a better world. So when in doubt, love, pray in love, and watch our world transform and be the change. Due to the unjust laws on tribal lands in the 1970 Oliphant versus Suquamish tribe, this law did not allow tribes to prosecute non-tribal members. My friend's daughter, Madison George, sits in jail. The court is attempting to charge her with murder because she shot her rapist, who was a non-Indian on the Colville reservation. And we are requesting letters of support and also our women here in the United States to support the Violence Against Women's Act 2021 that will help overturn the 1978 court decision so tribes may prosecute non-tribal members when they commit domestic violence, rape, molest, sex traffic, steal and murder our women and children on our reservations. Ni uno más, not one more. I love you. It's an honor to be able to be here today among some amazing women and amazing speakers, and thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Earth Feather. Appreciate that. We are also putting a link in for the webpage for the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women Washington. And there you can find information about Madison George and how to get in touch and send your support for her. So that'll be in the chat. Thank you. Our next speaker is ERÉNDIRA Munguía Villanueva. She's a mathematics professor at the University of Papaloapan. She lives in southern Mexico on the border between the states of Oaxaca and Veracruz. She's a socialist feminist activist and member of the Partido Obrero Socialista, an organization that celebrates 41 years of uninterrupted activity for the organization and emancipation of the working class in Mexico and for the international regrouping of the revolutionary forces. So welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here in this panel. It's an honor to share with all these revolutionary women. I'm very happy. Well, I want to talk about some aspects of feminism in Mexico in the recent days. I will share a presentation. So thanks for the invitation to be here in this panel. Well, I want to tell you a little bit about the last year in the demonstrations of the March 8th. There were around 80,000 women marching in Mexico City, but there were also demonstrations in many other parts of the country. And we were all together singing and dancing this song, Rapists in Your Way, that we saw before. And it was a huge demonstration, the biggest in the history of Mexico, a demonstration of women, a feminist demonstration. And for many women was the first time they went on the street marching for something. So it was historical. And I would like to tell you about what happened in this last year. And the title of this slide, "The Oppressive State is a Macho Rapist." It's one of the verse of the phrases in this song, "A Rapist in Your Way." So last year, I think almost every woman in Mexico knows how to sing this song and how to dance. And it was really popular in Mexico and all over the world, even in other languages. But I think the last year, the meaning of this song, of these verses, has now it has a more concrete reality. This what this song says. For example, this phrase, "the oppressive state is a macho rapist." Here in Mexico, in recent days, the president of Mexico is supporting the candidate Felix Salgado for governor of the state of Guerrero. And this man has been denounced 5 times for rape and sexual abuse. Nevertheless, President López Obrador supports him as Morena's candidate, the government party. And it's a very strong messages for Mexican women. The government is saying, we don't care your safety, we don't care your problems, and this is a patriarchal institution, the Mexican government, and we are going to put this rapist as a governor. This collective, CONAFE, has leading the protest against this candidate. But Salgado is a powerful man who has the total backing of the President AMLO, the President López Obrador. And if this candidate wins the June elections, we will literally have a macho rapist as a governor of the state of Guerrero. This state is where Acapulco is. So this phrase, "the oppressive state is a macho rapist," now it has a concrete reality in this with this candidate and with this phenomenon. Well, and this collective is one response to this to the government actions, but there are a lot of demonstrations against this Felix Salgado candidacy. Other fact of violence against women in Mexico has the other speaker said, is this other pandemic. Besides coronavirus, the feminicide, it's a big problem, it's a structural problem. And according to official reports, hundreds of women die in Mexico each year because of this cause. This is a map that shows the numbers since 2016 to 2020. And well, there are a lot of cases, and this contrasts to the number of arrests of the same cases where these are where an investigation has led to an arrest, and it's just few compared with the number of feminicides. These maps are made by Maria Salguero, that is a geographer outside the institution of the government. She said, I could not stay with folded arms in front of this barbaric fact. I have to do something. And I think this is the spirit of the recent days. We have not just seeing how all this violence is developing, we have to do something. And this is the number of sentences. And it's just very few. And this shows that there is a huge problem in for the institutions that it's supposed to work in investigation and prosecutors. This is not about one crazy guy, a serial killer. It's a huge problem and a structural problem. And in words of the colectivo Madres y Familiares de Víctimas de Feminicidio, mothers and relatives of victims of feminicide, they say, we know that the specialized units, prosecutor's office, investigation protocols, service models have been created, but the situation does not get better. There are a lot of institutions as protocols that institutions like the National Organization of Nations ask to the governments to create, but these institutions are useless because they are not working side by side the mothers and the relatives of the victims. And this collective asks, what good does it to create institutions if the investigation and punishment of crimes is not improved, if there is not guarantee of access to justice? So what is needed for us Mexican women and Latin American women and all over the world, what we need to have institutions that really take care of us. And as socialist feminists, we are convinced that the state is not just it's not just for manage the country, but is a tool that has their most important task to protect the economic system of private wealth and profit. And as long the state is a capitalist state, these institutions has their great objectives to keep the privilege of capitalists and not to keep the life and well-being of people. So violence against women will never be their priority. Under the capitalist state, we will be always at the risk of having macho governments and false promises of justice. So we think it is necessary to present and to push a socialist feminist program in order that working class women can really count with institutions that honestly take care of them. Reliable strategies to stop violence towards women, legal and free abortion, health, education, housing and well-paid jobs, access to justice. All of these things are necessary to live without violence. And in Mexico and all Latin America and other parts of the world, capitalism has not been able to provide. So this year, around 2,000 women demonstrated in the street in Mexico City in March 8, again to stop violence against women. And even when this number is less than the last year, it's a big number for pandemic situation. And we think feminists we are even stronger than last year because we have more experience, because the networks between us are still, we are still creating new networks between feminists in Mexico and in Latin America, and this event is an example of this. So we want to say, woman, rise against capitalism. And I just want to show a few pictures. This is a wall that the government of AMLO, López Obrador, put in front of, this is a kind of White House in Mexico. So they put this wall to protect the Palacio Nacional of the feminists for the March 8 demonstration. This was like 2-3 days before March 8, and it was to respond to the actions of the CONAFEM, this collective against Felix Salgado candidate. And in March 7, one day before the demonstrations, people were to write names of victims of feminicide in this wall, and they leave flowers. Even in the night, there was this mapping in the Palacio Nacional. So again, this shows the will of people of do something about this big problem that is feminicide and violence against women. It's not longer, I can wait until the government give a solution, but we have to go there and we have to demonstrate in order to stop this. And this is part of the March 8 in Mexico City. This is a moment when part of this wall fell. Well, that's all I want to tell you for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Erendira. It's wonderful. Thank you for the photos too. It just gives us more of a sense of, you know, being there. We will be putting in the chat the link to the Partido Obrero Socialista, so please check that out. See more photos and stories about what's going on and analysis about what's going on in Mexico and in Latin America, generally speaking. I'm pleased to introduce, hold on, sorry, I have my little script here. AMELIA KIRK-HARKIN, who's a leader in Melbourne Radical Women, where she is involved in the Workers Organizing to Win campaign, or WOW, which is raising a feminist platform for combating the discriminatory economic and social impacts of COVID. She was trained as an artist in England, and her beautiful graphic was used on today's event flyer. Amelia is currently an upholsterer apprentice and a member of the Construction, Forestry, Maritime, Mining, and Energy Union. So welcome from Melbourne, Amelia.
Hi everyone, thanks for having me. It's great to be here. Before I start, I just want to acknowledge that I'm coming to you guys from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. And as all the speakers have demonstrated before me, femicide is a global issue and Australia is no different. Statistics show that 1 woman per week loses her life to violence, and the vast majority of recorded femicides are women killed by domestic violence. But there are many others who have lost their lives in circumstances that are not considered femicide. The truth is, femicide comes in many forms and is the result of a sexist system that relies on patriarchy for its very survival. Because of this need for women's oppression, the capitalist system not only facilitates violence against women, it also creates it. One of the women not recorded in last year's femicides was the victim of a historic rape, with the Attorney General at the center of it. She has since died, allegedly by suicide. This is one of many assaults to come out recently involving Parliament members, some taking place in the very halls themselves. And as the administration calls for us to have faith in the justice system, it is clear to see how the system is designed to work against women and other oppressed groups. Victim survivors are blocked at every turn and put through grueling processes meant to wear them down. It also disproportionately punishes women, with them making up 8% of the prison population and only accounting for 1 to 2% of violent crime. And with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders being the most incarcerated people on earth, as well as facing disproportionately high rates of in custody, Indigenous women, because of their intersectional oppression, are even more affected. The system intentionally creates hostile and dangerous environments for any who challenge it. Recent attempts to do so have been made by the Morrison government in the form of a religious freedom bill and a bill to merge the family courts with the criminal courts. The Religious Freedom Bill is a direct attack on the LGBTQI+ community, but like most assaults made by the system, the damage is not limited to one marginalized community. With many aged care facilities, hospitals, shelters, and schools being run by religious institutions that prop up the tools of capitalism, like sexism and homophobia, those most vulnerable are put at even greater risk. The family court merger would also increase the risk to vulnerable people, and events like the murder of Hannah Clark and her 3 children who were burnt alive would only increase. But the hardest blow, as always, is dealt to those with intersectional oppressions. The LGBTQI+ community, people with disabilities, migrant communities, and other people of colour all need specificity in the family courts. But most importantly, there need to be specialist divisions that consider cultural obligations and practices of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families. This is to combat the genocidal practice of stealing Indigenous children, separating them from land and culture, a practice still being conducted through the foster care system. The purpose of attacks like these is to preserve the nuclear family, an institution that isolates people and births, feeds, clothes, and nurtures the workforce with women's unpaid labour. It also demonstrates how homophobia and transphobia are born from a need to protect this sexist institution, because the nuclear family cannot survive in a world where gender fluidity and sexuality is free. But where there is oppression, there is resistance. The LGBTQI+ community, particularly transgender people, have made great strides in recent years. Banning conversion therapy, easing restrictions around changing gender markers, and marriage equality are all important wins that smash the gender stereotypes and threaten the institutions that capitalism relies on. In the women's movement, droves of intersectional feminists come out for events like Slut Walk and International Women's Day. The IWD March in Melbourne this year was truly international, with women from South America and the Philippines drawing connections with the oppressive systems we all live under. And tomorrow they will be out again in cities across the country in response to the recent sexual assault scandal in Parliament. But the most impressive resistance comes from the Indigenous movements. Warriors of the Aboriginal resistance are a force to be reckoned with. They are militant, organised, and most importantly, they understand the interconnected nature of oppression and that it is rooted in capitalism. Each year, the Invasion Day rallies grow in size, and the Black Lives Matter rally held across the country last year was enormous. The atmosphere at these events is electric, and as radical women, it is thrilling to be a part of. And in other movements, strong leadership is often shown by Indigenous women. Radical women also sees the connections between different oppressed groups and brings our socialist feminist analysis into the other movements. As working class women, the pandemic has come with additional challenges. With growing job insecurity, harsh lockdowns, and increased police powers, radical women saw a need for women to come together to provide solutions. Working with groups of women across various industries, WOW campaign was started. The campaign makes crucial demands like shortening the working week with no loss of pay, nationalising industries under workers' control, and creating a universal income. Since joining Radical Women and becoming more involved in the various movements, I have seen tremendous strength and leadership, often coming from women and swelling from the ground up. And as we watch the world, we see the same resistance globally. The time for women to rise up together is now. Thank you, everyone.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Amelia. Okay, thank you for all our speakers as well. Before we start a discussion, I'd like to invite Brooke Sassy to make a brief announcement. Brooke's a Radical Women member who lives near Colorado Springs, in Colorado, and she teaches literacy skills at an elementary school while also earning her doctoral degree. She's the mother of 3 children and active in fighting racism, fascism, police murder, government harassment, and organizing for immigrant rights. So, turn it over to you, Brooke.
Thank you, Nancy. Thanks for introducing me. Hi, all. Thank you to everybody in attendance worldwide tonight. Particular thanks to Amelia, ERÉNDIRA, Earthfeather, and Charlotte for sharing your stories, sharing your time with us, sharing your research, sharing your work. We really appreciate you being here tonight, sharing with us. You may or may not know that Radical Women US, Radical Women Australia, Partido Obrero Socialista, and Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women Washington are all grassroots groups doing this work without government subsidy, without government funding. So we depend on our communities for support. If you are interested and able to donate today, you'll find a link in the chat to do so online, as well as 2 physical addresses, one for Radical Women in the US, one for Radical Women in Melbourne, if you prefer to send in a payment through the mail. All donations tonight will be split evenly between the 4 groups that are participating. And as always, we welcome you to post in the chat any donations that you're willing to share with us tonight, and someone will tally them and share them with us at the end of the program. I really look forward to the upcoming conversation. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Brooke. I was just busy typing away to put my donation in. So what we'll do is we will also let people know at the end of the program how much money we raised. And again, it's going to be divided amongst the groups represented on the panel because, as Brooke said, you know, even though we live under capitalism, we still need money. And even though we're, you know, talking about matriarchy and equality for women, under capitalism, we still need some dough to do that. So thank you. I'm seeing people putting in their amounts. Again, thank you so much. Okay.